So what we've done is going all the way back to that engineer's experience is bring all that information up to the forefront. What does your supply chain look like? What is driving the cost, not just from a materials perspective, but from a labor perspective, right? Can we get that information to you as quickly as possible and let you experiment and make changes and see how those changes impact things?
Hi everyone, it's Judy Warner. Welcome back to the OnTrack podcast. We are thrilled that you're able to join us again this week. Today we have a fascinating guest who is Chris Church, who is the Chief Product Officer and co-founder of Macrofab. They are putting the EMS industry on its head with new software enablement and taking this into digital transformation, sharing that kind of innovation with Altium. So lean in, enjoy. I'll see you on the other side.
Welcome to Altium's OnTrack podcast, where we talk to leaders about PCB design, tackling subjects ranging from schematic capture all the way to the manufacturing floor. I'm your host, Judy Warner. Please listen in every week and subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, and all your favorite podcast apps. And be sure to check out the show notes at altium.com/podcast, where you can find great resources and multiple ways to connect with us on social media.
Well, hey, Chris, so good to see you again.
Hey, Judy, it's great to see you again as well.
Well, before we get started, I think I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Macrofab, because it's a really innovative model for a business that you've set up there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm the Chief Product Officer at Macrofab. I lead our product and software engineering efforts. I'm also the co-founder. I was the founding CEO for about 5 years. And at Macrofab, really, if you think about it, the core of our mission is to transform the way electronics manufacturing works into more like a cloud service. We think more like AWS for manufacturing. But that of course is a little bit kind of pie in the sky. It doesn't tell you exactly what we do. So at a fundamental level, we are a digital manufacturing platform that is backed by a fully managed marketplace for excess manufacturing capacity in North America. So we enable our customers, whether they're an engineer or a purchasing team, to get either instantaneous or rapid quotes, to have what we call true elasticity in production. So when we think about, when we're talking about manufacturing, we have a tendency to talk about scale, right? That we're going to grow and we're going to get bigger all the time. But the truth is, not every product is always growing. Sometimes you need a little less than you needed before. The market conditions are changing. You get new products coming out, but you still need to support that old one. So that brings in the concept of what we call elasticity, which is, the ability to meet your production needs, whether you need 1, 10, 100, 10,000, etc., and no matter where you are in the life cycle of that product. So if you need to scale back a little bit, you can scale back. And we do this by working with over 70 factories in North America, that's Canada, US, and Mexico, including one we own, to enable our customers to purchase either one-off prototypes with a quick turn or all the way up to production scale volume, and matching them to the right factory for their next production run at the right time. And of course, this is not just sort of a matchmaking exercise. When I said it's fully managed, we do all of the supply chain, all of the kitting, all the tooling, all the engineering support. We're just like dealing directly with a factory, except, we have a lot of factories.
So this is a really unique model, and I'm excited to talk more about this with you and share the idea and the vision with our audience. You mentioned elasticity. So what were you seeing? You have a deep background really with software and technology. What happened? What was the impetus of why you as a co-founder decided to dig into this problem? What were the problems you were seeing? And how did you guys get started?
Yeah. So that is correct. My background is in software, specifically in cybersecurity and cloud computing. I've been doing that for about 20 years. Obviously, cloud computing is a more recent concept, but I started in networking software before then. But ultimately, I ended up starting a robotics company just because I like robotics. So I started a company making motion control systems for filmmakers, and that was really my first taste of working with contract manufacturers. And you know, we had a very niche product, right? Sometimes I might need thousands of a component, sometimes I might need a few dozen. And it didn't matter how small that circuit board was. I'd have a very large cell, necessary to have, that five I need a year. That's five cells for us. So the challenge we ran into is working, kind of with the traditional contract manufacturer experience is we couldn't get one factory that did a great job at producing all of our products. So that was one of the first challenges we had. I'm having to manage a lot of manufacturers to get my product catalog built. Which, as you understand, if you're a small business and you're trying to deal with that, that's a lot of overhead. And it also reduces your purchasing power, the relationship. You're going to have a worse relationship with the factory that builds 10 of something than the one that builds 10,000, right? So
Yeah, you bet.
and so the other thing I noticed was the kind of the customer experience was a little bit different than I was used to in the technology world. You know,
Little dated, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. I don't want to be too negative, but
Yeah.
the only interface I'm having to a company is through spreadsheets and Excel and email and phone calls. It makes it really hard to keep track of where you are on things. It makes it really slows down the whole process and introduces a lot of opportunity for error. So I looked at this and I said, hey, can we make this more like a cloud service I can consume, right? I don't have to think about going to a data center and negotiating a contract to deploy one server anymore. I can just push a button on AWS and get it. So that really was the inspiration. How do we provide that same kind of customer experience in a little more traditional market like contract manufacturing?
Seems like so in other words, you were personally encountering this problem and seeing an opportunity for disruption, right?
Yeah.
And you sort of mentioned at the top about transformation, and I think that's something Macrofab and Altium share together, because obviously with Altium 365 and Nexar, we're seeing cloud solutions could possibly do this in a much better way, a more modern way. You said earlier that you think of yourself the sort of AWS of manufacturing. What exactly do you mean by that, and what can someone who uses you as a supplier expect from an experiential standpoint?
Yeah, so when we talk about AWS, Amazon Web Services, there are a couple of parts of that experience. The one we think about a lot is the virtualization, the idea that there are resources out there that can be sliced and diced up and put to our purposes on demand. So that's one of the key things. Thinking, hey, if I need a production run of something, how quickly can I make that happen without having to go out and figure out who's going to do it, how long it's going to take, etc. I just want to put in, I need this much, I'm willing to spend this much, and I need this by this day, right? Can I make that happen? So that's one part of it. But to really make that work, right, you have to be able to orchestrate all the activities around that, whether it's managing the supply chain, shipping kits out, quality assurance, everything there. So that becomes that sort of control layer that we've built in, which is the thing that makes the whole thing work. At the end of the day, we can, lots of factories have capacity, but how do we make that actually available to you in real time, and what are the mechanics around that? And then going back to that point about elasticity, not getting locked in, not saying, hey, you used, 5 virtual servers last month, so now you need to use 5 or more this month, right? Well,
I see.
right? So not locking customers in to either keep their production consistent or growing, or have to go find a new manufacturer. So really thinking about those concepts, also giving a lot of self-service control, right? That was a big part of it, and I think you touched on that earlier with the solving my own problems, right? That was the first thing we really set out to do, was to give engineers a self-service experience, right? Because not every engineer, but a lot of engineers don't like talking to salespeople. And I'm notorious. We've got a lot of great salespeople. I love them to death, but I would prefer not to talk to a salesperson most of the time. I'm the kind of person that'll buy a car online, right?
Carvana, baby.
Yeah.
I'm right there with you.
Right. So, how do we give that self-service experience with a, true sense of control and transparency to the engineers? That was what we started out with. That was the first thing we came out with. And then as those, engineers and their products started to succeed and go to market, we wanted to give them the ability to scale. And so that's when we started bringing in support for purchasing teams and more robust company control over the whole process.
I find myself wondering in the last 15 months in this sort of pandemic area. I think there's two things I'm curious about. One is how long Macrofab has been in business, and two, what did this sort of COVID era do to the types of attention or jobs or onboarding you may have seen as people moved out of factories, or was it sort of non-consequential?
Yeah, so the two parts there. When did we start? We started in 2013. We launched the platform and the first version of the platform in 2015. So we've been around a little while. We're not exactly a spring chicken here. We're still pretty young and growing, but we're not. We didn't just start yesterday. Now, thinking about COVID, like everyone else, we had some impacts early on, from both the supply chain shutdown to a lot of companies, not knowing where the world is going and they're going to pull back a little bit. But we helped them manage through a lot of that. And, kind of thinking about, from our perspective, what this really did for us was combining with, the previous sort of tariff issues, supply chain insecurity going on. This just really ramped up this concept of supply chain insecurity. So it got a lot more companies thinking about it, right? And thinking about, potentially new ways to look at their production and how they manage it. And COVID really put a big, wrench into a lot of people's works in that they couldn't visit their factories anymore. Right.
Yeah.
So if you think about this concept, if you're a traditional, purchasing manager, et cetera, it's not unusual to send your engineers out to the factory every time there's a problem.
Right.
Send them on a plane, send them over to China, right? But now all of a sudden you can't do that, right?
Right.
Now, how do I get great, more visibility, more control? And those were the things that, our customers really were talking to us about. And, we've really been focused on enabling them to transition to a new world where they don't necessarily need that level of activity, where they can still get the same results that they're looking for.
You sort of are articulating something we've observed here, which is probably the move to the cloud or some more digital solutions to solve these things. It seems like these things were inevitable, but it seemed to just speed it up.
Right. Yeah.
And it sounds like that's sort of what's happened for you too. You mentioned China. Obviously, that's more of a production level. When Macrofab looks out, what is your demographic of the addressable market? And are you addressing work that might otherwise go to China? Are you staying in North America? And then who's your customer?
Yeah, so those are all great questions. If you think about where our focus is today, it is on the North American manufacturing market. Now that doesn't mean customers that are only based in North America, or production that has only ever happened in North America, but the sort of volumes and projects that really make more sense to happen in North America. Some of those have been being produced in China, Southeast Asia, etc., and haven't always been as successful as those customers would have liked. So we really focus on the mid-volume and lower production, U.S., Mexico, and Canada. And that's really where our sweet spot is from a production standpoint. Now, when we think about the customers we work with today, obviously there are certain types of products and markets where that sense of factory virtualization tends to work better and make more sense. And that tends to be in the industrial controls, the measurement, the IoT, the robotic spaces, where flexibility is as important or more important than leaning on the factory to solve all your product problems for you, right? A lot of
Right.
times with some consumer products, they're very, very, very challenging to produce, and it takes, may take months for a factory to be able to figure that out, no matter how much instruction you
Yeah.
give them. That doesn't tend to be a good fit for this kind of model today. Not saying it won't be in the future, right? But those are all
Right.
problems for us to solve that we haven't solved yet.
So, what's sort of the feedback you're getting over the last 7 years? What are people liking? What are people asking you for? Maybe that isn't enabled today. What's a general, putting your hand on the pulse of your customers? What are you hearing?
Yeah, so one of the first things, one of our focuses has been to provide transparency throughout the entire design engineering to production process. And a big part of that is giving feedback to the engineers earlier in the design as to what is driving their costs. And that's been a real big focus of ours, because as someone who has brought products to market myself, right, as both an engineer and an executive, that is always critical. If you can think, as an engineer, you tend to, hopefully have really good input from your product owner as to what the expectations are, right? What our ramp schedule is going to look like, what our price target needs to be. And sort of traditionally, engineers were left to go design a product that met all these features, throw it over the fence to a purchasing team, and then have that purchasing team come back and say, hey, this is too expensive. I can't get half these parts.
Yep.
This is too hard to make. What are you doing to me here, right? So what we've done is going all the way back to that engineer's experience, is bring all that information up to the forefront. What does your supply chain look like? What is driving the cost, not just from a materials perspective, but from a labor perspective, right? Can we get that information to you as quickly as possible and let you experiment and make changes and see how those changes impact things, right? And kind of like from our perspective, you know, you're 5% in your design. I'm already showing you a price graph at scale, right, of what you've done so far and
Right.
how that's driving your price. So you can see that and go, okay, am I on the right track? Am I going to be able to produce enough? So our core goal there, and one thing we've done a great job with a lot of our customers, is minimizing that handoff to the purchasing team, right? Saying, hey, look, I've already solved 90% of these problems when they get to you.
Yeah.
So we don't have to go back and forth. And
Right.
that kind of leads me to the next part there, because we do, you know, production, supporting our customers in actually getting their product to market, not just designing their product, is, a critical component of our service offering. So, the other thing we've done is we've brought the purchasing team into the same platform with the engineers. So instead of, handing off, packets of files, exports out of their, manufacturing package exports out of their EDA tools, what
Right.
they're doing is they're building everything in the platform, getting all that feedback, all that input, and then with the push of a button, making that available to their purchasing team, knowing that they can't change it, right? And if something needs to be changed, all of that can be tracked to that same platform. We get that history, the visibility into it, and making it easier for the purchasing teams, because now they don't have to talk about this stuff, right? We don't have to talk about what's in my bill of
Yeah.
materials, etc. So that's been, one of the things we really focus on is, starting from that engineer's perspective, how do we give you visibility all the way back into, you know, at the earliest stage of the design, that will help you make a better purchasing decision later when your product's in production. And really, when we think about why, one of the reasons why we partnered with Altium, going forward, is we share that vision, right? It's,
Absolutely.
talking with Ted, talking with Aram, everybody, right? It's the same message. We're all looking at the same problems, saying, how do we give the engineers better visibility from the very initial state of their design, so that they can more easily move into production with fewer problems.
Yeah. It is a game changer. And yeah, talking to you is a little like talking to my colleagues or the executive team. It's a similar theme. So for our audience, I just wanted to mention real quick, I am putting links below to Macrofab's website so you can go poke around and see what they're doing. And also they have a podcast, so I think you can learn more there. And so go check out the show notes later. Okay, now for the elephant in the room. You talk about giving a lot of supply chain intelligence, and I know our own Octopart, and we've talked here on the podcast with IHS, and I know you're facing the same issues. What has that been like for you, and how are you trying to give those engineers and those purchasing people as many tools and as much visibility as possible, and what has that done to Macrofab?
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, if you need part X and it's not available in the market, nobody can get part X, right? So
Yep.
there certainly are some situations where we've had to work with our customers to say, hey, you might have to do a redesign here. Let's help you guide in that direction. And that's not something, we take lightly because, the goal is to get you that early in the design phase. But with the parts market changing the way it is, the reality is that everyone's in the same boat right now. Now the question is what can we do better, right? What can we do more
Right.
to better enable our customers to succeed? And so what we've been really doing is kind of looking, we're starting with the back end. How do we build tools that provide greater intelligence around the future
Yeah.
availability of materials, right? What's going to go
Yeah.
out of stock next? What does risk look like? What's driving that risk? So we've been building, some of these in the background and sort of testing them out. I think I was saying earlier, when we were talking previously, I was up late last night working with one of y'all's new APIs to see how I could leverage some of that information and bring it into the data we
Yeah.
have. And so, I think what we're going to see kind of going forward is this is an opportunity to really build better intelligence into the products and not just saying, hey, here's where things are today, but starting to work to really predict the future state of components, etc. Now, I think the risk we always run in this market because we saw this in 2018, we saw this repeat multiple times
Yep.
previously, is what we're
Yep.
trying to avoid is a bullwhip effect, right? Where people start
Absolutely.
over ordering, because they're just trying to get themselves at the top of the list. And I've seen that also from the component manufacturers themselves. In 2000, back in 2018, it seems like so long ago, but it was just very recently. A lot of them
Yeah.
got burned on the passives market by bringing online new capacity to meet all these orders, and then turning around, and once they got these factories up and running, those orders started getting canceled because people were putting double, triple orders all over the place just to try to get themselves at the top of the queue somewhere. So
Right.
what I have been seeing is the component manufacturers really getting wise to that. And we've had a number of manufacturers actually come in and say, okay, look, we understand you have projections and all of this. We're happy to help you support those. But if you want it, you really got to commit. So we're seeing a lot of parts that were not, NCNR, non-cancelable, non-returnable. Now the manufacturers are saying, if you want any supply of this, for the next 6 months, for the next year, maybe for the next 2 years, you're going to have to turn
Yeah.
around and commit to purchasing it, with a non-cancelable, non-returnable order. So what does that mean for what we do with engineers and what we do with our customers? Is we help them think about their long-term production strategies and kind of look at
Yeah.
where we can create commonality across their products and then get them that opportunity to secure some of those materials by thinking about how they're going to use it for the next year or two, right? And think about, in what ways they can change a few of their products and start sharing those materials. Maybe think about, you know, are there other customers? Because we have a very, very, very large customer base, for a quote unquote contract manufacturer. We have thousands of customers. Um, So the
Wow.
ability for us to look across that entire customer base and say, hey, there's 6 of you using this part,
I
right? Now,
see.
none of you have enough volume demand to really justify, exciting this manufacturer. But if we start pulling all you guys together, right, and if we're able to kind of look and align the production goals of each of you, now we can start making sense to this manufacturer and start getting priority in their supply chain. So those are just a handful of the things that we've done so far.
Now, you said something earlier I wanted to circle back on, and you said you had your own factory, but then you had 70 or so EMS partners that you
Hmm.
work with. But I think when we had our initial conversation, you also said you own
Yeah,
that work. It's a
right.
macrofab, so you're not acting like a
Hmm.
broker where you're just throwing it over the fence. So tell us more
Yeah.
about that and why you felt it was important to do it in that
Yeah, so
way.
if you think about, we think, so we tend to think sometimes in, general business levels, and you got to start from first principles, right? So if we look out on the contract manufacturing market in general, you know, we use a measure called Net Promoter Score to measure, how satisfied, customers are with the services they're using. And that Net Promoter Score, if you look across the contract manufacturing market, I think averages something like -3, which means far more customers would rather fire their vendor than recommend them to somebody. It's not the worst, right? It's better than cable, it's better than insurance, but that's not a great customer experience. So if we start
Right,
from those sort of first principles, right, that we take a customer first approach, that we want to provide an amazing customer experience, then the question is how do you do that, right? So if we were to just, take that engineer, take that company, and connect them up with the factory, they're going to get the experience on average that factories give people on average, right? So it's not going to be a much better
right,
experience. So,
right.
I used the term earlier, a fully managed marketplace, and
Yes,
what that means is the connection isn't between the customer and the factory. The connection is between us and the customer. Um, and if we talk about a typical broker arrangement, right, they make introductions to factories. The factories provide the quotes. The factories provide all of the services, the engineering, the supply chain, etc. And the broker is there to kind of help smooth out issues in the relationship. In a lot of ways, it's kind of like a lead generation, really. But that's going to provide, again, that same experience they've been getting. So we looked at it and said, how do we provide a better experience for our customers? Well, the first is we will be their manufacturer. So we have a full engineering team, and by manufacturing engineering, right? Electrical engineering. We
right.
do all of the supply chain. We do all of the kitting. We manage the tooling. We're the ones providing the support for the factories, and we're the ones providing the support for the customer, and we're the ones guaranteeing the quality to the customer. So if there's a problem, we're not saying, "Oh yeah, well, here's the factory. Go take it up with them."
Yeah,
Right.
over there. It's them,
It's
not
it's
us.
us first and foremost. It's our team they talk to. We resolve that problem, and we'll most certainly involve the factory in helping us to resolve that problem. But we're the ones who
Yeah.
manage that with the customer. And so in that way, we're really what we're trying to do is provide a much higher level of service and a much better customer experience than they would get if they went to the manufacturers directly.
Okay, so I'm thinking about our listeners right here going, that's so awesome, right? You're going to take this weight off my back and come alongside and truly partner with me. And then their second thought is like, oh, this is going to cost me so much more money.
Yeah.
So what's the truth about that, and what's the sort of cost of benefit, and how does that work just, on a kind of quick overview
Right.
level?
So
I'm being the
yeah.
devil's advocate for our listeners,
So,
Chris,
so,
so.
so there are, unfortunately, there are natural laws of the universe, and there are natural laws of any market. You know, Coming from a software perspective, it's really easy to say we're providing more value, we charge a lot more money. And that would be a typical technology perspective, and I would love to be able to do that. Except the reality is, we're both and I'm going to get a little esoteric here for a moment. I hope you apologize in advance. The fundamentals of the relationship between the customer and the vendors in the market here are very different than other industries. It's not a need to have, it's not an optimization exercise for the customers of contract manufacturers. It's an essential part of their business, right? They need that product
Right.
manufactured so that they can sell it. Now, they also, as a customer, have to hit certain margin profiles. There are costs beyond manufacturing that involved in there. So
You
there
bet.
isn't as much price elasticity as we would see in this market as we would in other markets. So
You bet.
so now I'm going to bring it back a little bit to earth. I apologize, but
Okay. All right.
but
I
but
get
given that,
it.
right, we cannot charge a lot more than everyone else. But we're in a special position here. We're not, as we said, we're not a broker, right? We're not trying to
Right.
extract value or extract profit out of very little value. Since we own the supply chain, since we own the engineering, the customer experience, we're able to better control the costs. And so, our target is for any given product to be roughly around the medium price point you're going to expect in the market. So if you went to 100 factories,
Very good.
what we're focused on providing you is that right price point where it's going to fall in the middle there. You can always get it cheaper than us, and you can certainly always spend more than us, right? But our job is to find the right price to guarantee the ongoing manufacturability of your product and the level of service and quality you're looking for. So we don't cost a lot more than anyone else. Typically, we're going to cost about what you're paying on average with your existing manufacturers. And our profit model is very much like every other manufacturer's. It's to the value we add, not by adding some upcharges on top of that.
Right. Well, and I know this from coming from the EMS industry, and it's like the key is to optimize the process, right? And streamline it, because then you can bleed off some of those unnecessary costs. But from the OEM standpoint, their customer standpoint, those delays that happen through phone calls and file transfers and going back between purchasing and the engineer and end of life and all the complexities. It's a very complex process. But if there's someone in the middle that can give the entire team full transparency, then their time to market's quick, the time they save. And so this is all putting money back in the customer's pocket. And there's probably some relief on the EMS side too,
Yeah.
frankly.
And
So it seems like a win across the
yeah,
board.
and when you think
And
about it, if you're managing 10 factories today, what's the overhead of doing that? Sure, it's not showing up in the individual cost of goods of that product, but it's showing up in your overall
Right.
budget. It's showing up in an administrative line item, right? And that's
You
often a
bet it
challenge.
is.
People in this market tend to look at
Hard to
right. Tend
articulate,
to look
isn't
at
it?
the direct costs. They don't look at the TCO, as we call it, the total cost of ownership.
Mm-hmm.
But that's fine, right?
Yep.
When you provide that better experience and a similar price point and better outcomes, it becomes obvious not just to the person in charge of making that purchase, but to the people they report to. You kind of see through the entire organization. The value starts to be easily recognizable there.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I've definitely had that challenging place as both a sales and marketing person in the EMS space, is to talk about the total cost of ownership. And, when you can take, if you're in a market like IoT, which is some of your customer base, time to market is important for everybody. But when there's so much, the volume of development of IoT devices is so fast, you miss that window, you could be out of business. It gets really, really critical in different
And there's
markets because competition.
And there's a certain
ahead.
risk management in there as well, right? When
That's a
you
good point.
work directly with one contract manufacturer, one factory, the risks to your product are not just those things in your bill of materials or your design or the cost. You're really, making your success reliant on the performance of an individual factory. And that's one thing we've
Right.
seen, like, I, I love, working with contract manufacturers. At the end of the day, I spend so much time doing it. But when performance can change at, say, a small factory because one person leaves, right? Or
Oh,
they get a
yeah.
bigger customer, right? And now there's no more capacity for you. Those things are all risk to the
Yep.
survivability and the marketability of your product, and things that we don't tend to take into account unless we're really big customers, right? But if you have a product, say you're only making $50,000 worth of that a year, right? It's one product in your catalog. Again, having experienced this, that small product in your catalog may be 5% of your profit at the end of the year, right? Because it enables a bunch of other sales for your company. So putting your entire egg, all your eggs in one basket exposes you to a high
Uh-huh.
level of risk. And that's really one of the things that we've really focused on providing to our customers is shelter and prevention of that risk by, part of the reason why we have that engineering team and we own that whole process and that supply chain is to optimize the transition between factories. So we take real-time quality feedback on how these factories are performing, and we're able to map it down to like the
Mm-hmm.
aspects of the design that cause them to perform better or worse. And we take that information back in, and when we start seeing a change in performance, we can transition products very quickly from one factory to another without having to go through that painful relationship building, value
Yep.
propositioning,
Mm-hmm.
NPI process all over again
Mm-hmm.
from the customer perspective. It just happens seamlessly and transparently as far as they're concerned.
Oh, God bless you, software engineers and data analysts. We haven't had that kind of intelligence around this space before. I mean,
Right.
not in this way, anyways.
Yeah.
It's really exciting. I think this conversation, I think what I'm taking away from you is that what Macrofab has done has moved us away from being a reactive force and becoming a proactive one and giving upfront intelligence, which is
Yeah.
game changing.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining today. I think it's fascinating what you and your team is doing, and we're going to look forward. And as you continue to partner with Altium, I'm sure we'll get back together when those APIs get built out and give our customers hopefully more direct access to you through our tools. But we'll
Yeah.
see how that goes. Not predicting anything, but I think we're on a road that way to make things easier. So thanks so much, Chris,
Of
for
course, Judy,
joining us
and
today.
you're welcome, and thank you for having me.
It's been a delight. To our listeners, thanks so much for joining us today. Again, in the show notes, I put Macrofab's website in there, their podcast, also the press release that talks about the partnership between Altium and Macrofab. So dig in and go learn some more. I think this is really exciting technology. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast. We will see you next week. Until then, remember to stay healthy, stay safe, and always remember to stay on track.